So one of the biggest gotchas Muslim apologists have is that your Bible's corrupted, changed, copied so many times you don't even have the original. And here's the part that gets Christians. Most of them don't have an answer, so they fold. Today we fix that, and we don't just defend, we apply that exact same standard right back, and watch where it lands. Here's how the conversation always goes. You're talking to a Muslim friend, or you're reading the comments, and the line comes up, the Bible's been changed. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. The Quran is perfectly preserved, word for word, unchanged since the 7th century. And it sounds devastating. It sounds like a knockout, because most Christians have never actually examined the manuscript evidence for either book. So they get quiet, they retreat, maybe they mumble something about faith. Not today. Today we do what this ministry was built to do. We go to the evidence, because 1 Peter 3:15 doesn't say feel a reason for the hope you have. It says give a reason, be ready. So let's get ready. Here's the structure of today's briefing. 4 bullets. 1. The telephone game myth, and why it's flat wrong. 2. Why thousands of variants actually prove the Bible is reliable instead of breaking it. 3. The Quran's preservation story they never tell you, the part where the evidence got burned. And 4. The tactical reframe. One standard applied honestly to both books, and we see where it lands. This isn't about attacking anyone, it's about the truth. Ground truth. So let's get to it. Bullet 1, the telephone game myth. They call it the telephone game. You know the one. Kid whispers a sentence down a line of 30 people, and what comes out the other end is gibberish. That's a picture in your head when they say copy of a copy of a copy. Here's a tactical response. That picture's wrong. Completely wrong. And here's why. The telephone game has one line, one chain. Each person hears only the person before them. If somebody messes up, the error gets passed down, and nobody can catch it, because nobody can go back to the source. That's not how the New Testament was copied. Think of it this way. The text didn't travel down one line. It exploded outward, in every direction at once. Copies went to Rome, to Antioch, to Alexandria, to North Africa, to Asia Minor. Hundreds of communities copying independently in different languages, separated by mountains and seas, with no way to coordinate even if they wanted to. So it's not a chain, it's a tree. A family tree with thousands of branches. And here's why that matters tactically. When you have thousands of independent copies, you can compare them. If a scribe in Egypt made a slip, the copy in Rome doesn't have it. You line them up side by side and the mistake sticks out instantly. The error has nowhere to hide. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers win this fight. We have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Add the Latin, the Syriac, the Coptic, you're past 20,000. And now compare that with other ancient works nobody disputes. Homer's Iliad, under 2,000 copies, and the earliest is centuries after he wrote. Caesar's Gallic Wars, about 10 manuscripts, the earliest 900 years after Caesar. Nobody says, well, we can't trust what Caesar wrote. Nobody. The Bible isn't poorly attested, it's the best attested document of the entire ancient world. It's not even close. The skeptic who throws out the corruption claim is standing on the one document that has more evidence behind it than anything else humans have ever written. That's not a contradiction, that's history. But here's where they push back. Okay, but there's mistakes in those copies. Hundreds of thousands of them. Good, let's talk about that, because that's bullet 2, and it's the one that flips the whole thing. 400,000 variants. That's the number they love to throw, and it sounds terrifying until you understand what a variant actually is. A variant is any difference between any two manuscripts, any spelling difference, any word order. If one scribe writes Jesus Christ and the other writes Christ Jesus, that's a variant. If a copy spells a word with an extra letter across 1,000 manuscripts, that one spelling counts as 1,000 variants. So here's a tactical reframe. The reason we have so many variants is because we have so many manuscripts. Think about it. If I had only one copy of the Bible, one, I'd have 0 variances. Perfect. No disagreements. But also no way to know if that single copy was accurate. The variants aren't evidence of corruption. They're a byproduct of abundance. The more witnesses you have, the more minor disagreements you can catch, and the more precisely you can reconstruct the original. Now here's the part they never mention. Scholars sort these variants into categories, and the overwhelming majority, we're talking around 99%, are meaningless. Spelling, word order, a slip of the pen that doesn't change a thing. Because Greek doesn't depend on word order the way English does. The man saw the dog, and the dog, the man saw, mean the same thing in Greek. What's left? The variants that are both meaningful and viable, that could actually affect the sense of the passage. is a tiny fraction of 1%, and not a single one of them, not one, touches a core doctrine of the Christian faith. The deity of Christ, the resurrection, salvation by grace. None of it hangs on a disputed verse. The foundation is rock solid across every manuscript tradition we have. Think of it this way. Imagine a witness testimony copied by 5,000 court reporters. A few misspell a name. One swaps 2 words. You don't throw out the testimony. You lay all 5,000 transcripts side by side and you reconstruct exactly what was said with overwhelming confidence. That's not a weakness. In a court of law, that's the strongest evidence you can present. More witnesses, more certainty. So when a skeptic says variants prove corruption, here's your tactical response. Variants prove the opposite. They're the fingerprints of an open, traceable, verifiable text. Nothing was hidden, nothing was burned. Every disagreement is right there in the open for anyone to examine. And that word burned, hold on to it, because that's exactly where bullet 3 takes us. Bullet 3, the Quran's preservation story they don't tell you. So now we apply the standard, because here's the thing about a standard. If it's a real standard, it has to cut both ways. You don't get to swing at the Bible and then drop it when we turn to your book. One measuring stick, both texts, let's go. The claim is, the Quran is perfectly preserved, word for word, unchanged since the 7th century. One book, no variances, identical everywhere on earth. That's the claim. Now let's look at the Islamic sources themselves. Not Christian sources, their own histories, their own hadith collections. Sahih al-Bukhari, the most trusted hadith collection in Sunni Islam, here's what it records. After Muhammad died, the Quran wasn't a book. It was scattered, memorized in pieces, written on palm leaves, on flat stones, on bone, in the chest of men. Then came the Battle of Yamama, and many of the memorizers, the Hufaz, were killed. And the companions panicked because the text that was dying with those men who held it. So under the first caliph, Abu Bakr, they began collecting it. Now stay with me, because this is the part that ends the conversation. A generation later, under the third caliph, Uthman, there was a problem. The Muslim armies had spread across the world, and the different regions were reciting the Quran differently. Different enough that the soldiers were arguing about whose recitation was correct. So Uthman commissioned one official version, one standardized text, and then, this is recorded in Bukhari, he ordered every other version burned, gathered up all the competing manuscripts, all the variant codices, and destroyed them by fire. Sit with that. The reason the Quran looks so uniform today is not because variants never existed, it's because the variants were collected and burned by the state. That's not preservation, that's standardization by force. You don't burn the evidence if the evidence agrees with you, you burn it when it doesn't. And here's a tactical hammer. We found some of it. The Sanaz palm set, discovered in Yemen in 1972, in the ceiling of an old mosque, a Quranic manuscript with lower text scraped off and written over, and when scholars used modern imaging to recover that erased lower layer, they found a different Quran underneath, different wording, different verse orders in place, a textual tradition that didn't match the Uthmanic standard. The very thing they told you never existed, recovered from under the floorboards. So let's be precise, the way a court is precise. The Bible has thousands of manuscripts. Openly compared, nothing hidden. Every variant on the table for anyone to inspect. The Quran has a history of competing versions that were deliberately destroyed by the central authority, with physical evidence of those lost versions surfacing as recently as the 20th century. One of these texts has an open, traceable, transparent history. The other has a controlled, edited, curated one. And it's not the Bible that lit the match. That's not an attack. That's their own sources. That's history. So now you've got the evidence on both books. But evidence isn't the win by itself. The win is knowing how to deploy it without failing into their trap. That's bullet 4. Here's the mistake almost every Christian makes in this conversation. They go on defense. The Muslim apologist attacks the Bible, and the Christian spends the whole time defending, explaining, apologizing for variances. And even if you win every point, you've let them set the terms. You've accepted that the Bible is the thing on trial. Flip it. Here's a tactical response. The moment the corruption claim comes out, you don't defend. You ask one question. What standard are you using to call the Bible corrupted? And have you applied that same standard to the Quran? Because here's what's really happening. They're using a double standard. For the Bible, the existence of variants proves corruption. For the Quran, the absence of variants proves preservation. But those both can't be the test. If variants prove corruption, then a text with variants burned isn't preserved, it's scrubbed. And if uniformity proves preservation, then it was achieved by destroying evidence, which is the opposite of trustworthy transmission. You can't have it both ways. Pick a standard, apply it honestly, and when you do, the Bible, with its open, abundant, transparent manuscript record, comes out as the most reliable ancient text on earth. And the claim that started this whole conversation collapses. Now hear me on this, because it matters. The goal here is not to humiliate your Muslim friend. This isn't about scoring a point or walking away. It's about clearing a way for false claims so the real conversation can happen. The one about who Jesus is and what he did. You don't win a soul by winning an argument, you win the right to be heard. The evidence opens the door, the gospel walks through it. So when someone tells you the Bible's been corrupted, you don't flinch and you don't fold. You smile and you say, let's apply that standard to both books. I'll go first. That's a trained believer. That's what this ministry builds. Let's run this back. 1. It's not the telephone game. It's a manuscript tree. And the Bible is the best attested document in human history. 2. The variants don't break it. They prove it. Because nothing was hidden. 3. The Quran's uniformity isn't preservation. It's standardization, with the competing versions burned by Uthmanic and the pieces that recovered from a mosque ceiling in Yemen. And 4. You don't defend, you reframe. One standard, both books, applied honestly. That's your tactical briefing. That's an argument you'll never lose again, because it's not an opinion, it's evidence. So we've been arguing about the paper, which manuscripts, which copies, whose version got burned, and that fight matters. You have to clear the false claim before you can be heard. But let me ask you one question that actually counts, the question underneath the whole debate. You can prove a book is reliable. Fine. Reliable to do what? What does that book you're trusting actually promise you? Because a perfectly preserved menu is worthless if there's no food in the kitchen. So let's apply the standard one last time. One question, both books. What does each one offer the soul standing in front of it? And here's where the two could be further apart. Open the Quran on salvation. And here's the system. From their own text, Surah 21, verse 47. The scales of justice. On the day of resurrection, your deeds get weighed. Good on one side, bad on the other. And if the good outweighs the bad, you have hope. Hope.
We have a 0% probability. The cross is the only open gateway. This is your final briefing.
Surah 70 says it plainly. Those whose scales are heavy, they're the successful. Those whose scales are light, they lost their souls. So it's a balance, a ledger. You spend your whole life stacking good deeds and praying the scale tips the right way at the end. And here's a tactical question. Under that system, can you ever know? Can you know today where you stand? You can't. Because the scale isn't weighed until you're dead. And listen, this isn't me putting words in their mouth. Their own trusted source, Sahih al-Bukhari, records the Prophet of Islam himself saying he did not know what would be done with him or his followers. The man at the center of the religion, no assurance. He didn't even have certainty. What exactly is being offered to you? That's a system, a scale you can't see, weighed on a day you can't predict, with a verdict you can't know. Submission, and then hope. Now open the Bible and watch the entire frame change. The gospel doesn't hand you a scale, it tells you the scale already came back, and you failed it. Romans 3, all have sinned. Every one of us is light on the scale, and no amount of good deeds tips it, because the standard isn't better than average. The standard is perfect, and we're not. So if you stop there, both books leave you in the same place, striving, sweating, hoping. But it doesn't stop there. Here's the difference. Here's the whole thing. In Islam, the servant climbs up towards God by his deeds. In Christianity, God comes down to the servant. He doesn't lower a scale, he pays the debt himself. That's the cross. That's the perfect one stepping onto the light side of the scale and putting his own weight where yours fell short. Not a teacher pointing at the mountain, a rescuer climbing into the pit. They call that a crutch. Here's a tactical response. It's not a crutch, it's a rescue. You don't shame a drowning man for grabbing the rope. The cross isn't weakness, it's the only reason the scale ever balances. And the difference shows up in one word, assurance. 1 John chapter 5, verse 13. I write these things to you who believe, that you may know you have eternal life. Not hope, no. The same certainty the Quran couldn't offer its own prophet, the Bible hands to a brand new believer on day one. Why? Because your salvation doesn't rest on the scale. It rests on the finished work. That last word Jesus said on the cross. It is finished. Paid. Done. A debt mark settled. So lay them side by side one final time, the way a court lays out the verdict. One book gives you a ledger and tells you to balance it yourself, and even then, no guarantee. The other tells you the debt's been already paid, the work's already finished, and you can know where you stand before you take another breath. One offers submission and uncertainty. The other offers a father and a home. That's not a small difference, guys. That's the difference between working for a verdict your whole life and receiving one as a gift. Between a scale and a cross. Between maybe and it is finished. And that's why the manuscript fight was never really about manuscripts. We had to prove the book was trustworthy so you believe what it says. And what it says is this: you don't have to earn your way up. He already came down. The rescue's already run. The only question left is whether you'll grab the rope. Let's run the whole briefing back. 1. It's not a telephone game, it's a manuscript tree. And the Bible's the best attested document in human history. 2. The variants don't break it, they prove it. 3. The Quran's uniformity wasn't preservation, it was standardization, with the competing versions burned. 4. You don't defend, you reframe. One standard, both books. And 5. When you apply that standard all the way down to salvation itself, one book hands you the scale you never be sure of. The other hands you a cross that's already finished. That's the case. That's the evidence. For the paper and for the soul. Now here's my ask. We are pushing for 500 subscribers, and everyone is a new believer getting equipped to have this exact conversation without flinching. If this gave you a weapon and an answer you didn't have before, hit the subscribe button right now. Help us hit the milestone. And if you've been sitting there carrying your own scale, exhausted, never sure if you've done enough, hear me. You can put it down. The work is finished. Grab the rope. Subscribe to Weapons Training now and become informed. And go sharpen your sword.